Good morning, children. This is going to be my September wrap-up, and thank goodness for that. I'm ready to just push this month out of the way and get to all the spooky stuff. I already have a lot of fun costumes lined up for my October videos, and all sorts of fun, spooky surprises are coming your way. For right now, let's talk about September, the good, the bad, the ugly. So September, I think, was a pretty good month. I came across some really great books, a couple not so good. I feel like I'm starting to get more critical. BookTube has ruined me because I can't enjoy some things as much as I would have otherwise. September was also a good month because it was my birthday. Had a really good birthday. Not that I'm gonna brag about it or anything or like show off my gifts at all. Sorry, just needed a drink out of my awesome new coffee cup. Anyways, I'm gonna start off with my first book. I'm just gonna go in order so you can follow me on this reading journey that this month has brought me on. So first off, kind of ending August and starting up September, my bridge book between the 2 months was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I feel like this one really catered to me. Personally, it takes place after the world has ended. The sickness has wiped out like 90% of the population. There's no electricity, no nothing. And the majority of the story takes place 20 years after it has happened. And it follows a group of people who travel around and perform Shakespeare for all of the survivors. And they go to different towns, find different people, and then just spread art, which I think is a great premise just to start with. It tells stories from multiple perspectives. It goes back and forth in time. It gives you really, really good views on different characters. It shows a lot of parallels between different things. And mainly, I think the point of the book is to show how people have the need to connect. Because it stresses at the beginning, before the plague, how the world has become so much more connected with internet, with phones, with everything, and then it takes all of that away and still shows this human need to connect. There's a lot of heartache in it, there's crazy people, there's cults, there's towns that have gone to complete ruin, but there's still such a resonating tone of hope throughout it that as long as there is the need for people to connect, there will be advancement in life. And it does a wonderful job of that by showing stories that have happened before the plague, after the plague, and sort of during, whenever it happens. It follows many different people that are all connected in some way. Mainly they're connected through a comic book called Station 11. I'm not going to get too much into that because it's just a beautiful story, and I was really excited to not know much about this and discover it all for myself, so this is definitely a journey you are going to want to take. Next book, I already knew the plot of. I had seen the movie to it long time ago, and I finally decided to pick up the book because I've been getting more into Stephen King. And that is The Green Mile, which is a 6-part series where, in the style of Charles Dickens, he would release his book in increments. So people would be more and more excited for the next one. And all of these did end on cliffhangers, so I could not imagine being here whenever this book very first came out, waiting for the next bit. It takes place on the Green Mile, which is pretty much death row, where people will wait before they're sent to the electric chair. And it follows the lead warden going through business as usual until a giant of a man, John Coffey, is put up for execution. I really don't want to say any more than that. There's a lot of elements of the supernatural. There is a lot of beautiful humanity to it. I do have to say, honestly, this is one of the rare instances where I still think I enjoy watching the movie than reading the book. And this is mainly because the movie gets so close to the book. They are practically the exact same thing. The only difference is the movie has the best actors for it. If you haven't seen or read The Green Mile, I definitely recommend it. It will leave you crying buckets and buckets of tears. Next on my list is one I was really excited to read. I am now in love with Madeline Miller, who is a wonderful author. She's only come out with 2 books yet, but she writes about Greek mythology, which is my new obsession. I read Song of Achilles, which was just as beautiful as Circe. I do have to admit, though, I did like Circe a little more, mainly because I was invested in the character right away. This one took me a little bit to get into. Obviously, this centers around the Trojan War, but there's a lot of stuff that happens beforehand It follows Patroclus and Achilles, who are in the Iliad the bestest of friends, but this follows them as lovers, which was very beautiful. But to me, the relationship didn't really show its strengths and weaknesses until the Trojan War, so all of like the stuff before that kind of seemed like a reason for just exposition, which I'm okay with. There is a lot of exposition to the Trojan War, but I wasn't really invested until that point. Next, ironically enough, my book of the month pick came in, and it's also about the Trojan War, and that was The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. If you have seen one of my videos from last month, I think it was like 3 videos ago, I actually compared the two, Song of Achilles and Silence of the Girls, to see kind of which one did it better when it came to the Trojan War. They ended up being very different books. This one actually follows Briseis during the Trojan War, and it's a very, very different story. This one had a lot of good strengths to it. It was a different look on the history of it from the women's perspective and how horribly they were treated. It was hard to compare the two really because they were so different. If you don't know, Briseis ended up being a war prize for Achilles, which ultimately meant she was his bed slave, which is a horrible situation for her to be in. Both books deal with it differently. In Song of Achilles, she's not even that because Achilles is gay, so she's just kind of rescued from like another guy in that. In here, he is definitely not. So you get a very different perspective. It was very hard to compare the two because they were so different. Mainly the only reason that Song of Achilles I thought was a little better was because this one had a bit of inconsistency with the writing. Pat Barker is very, very good at writing emotions, very good at writing characters, but every now and then you would just get these phrases that would completely throw me off that sounded so modern Valley Girl. And I get more into this in my other video. I'm not going to bore you all with it again. But I still liked it. I still think it's a very important read, and I definitely still recommend it, especially to anyone who's into Greek mythology, anyone who's into like war history. It offers a very valuable perspective. The next one on my list was a middle grade. After reading about all of the war, bloodshed, rape, and emotional trauma, I needed something a little lighter. I didn't get that. I read a Newbery Honor book, middle grade, so I expected it to be a little lighter, and it was, comparatively, but it still left me so pissed off, and that was Wolf Hollow. This one was very beautiful in the way that the author wrote. It had a very To Kill a Mockingbird vibe, especially with the moral, which is don't judge a book by its cover, which ironically I bought this book because of the cover. It's so pretty and it looks so fall-like. But this is a historical fiction about a girl living in a small town during World War II, and she is just trying to escape this bully constantly, who's trying to torment her, who's trying to torment this guy Toby. And Toby is kind of a wanderer. He was in the First World War, and he has major PTSD, he has major issues, so he doesn't really live anywhere, he just wanders the woods all day and all night. There's a lot of judgment going his way from different people, because at this time things like PTSD and like disabled veterans weren't a thing that were addressed as often, and it really shows in this book, because there's just so much judgment. But anyways, what ends up happening is the bully tries to frame him for something he did not do. Mainly, what pissed me off the most was people's ability to judge so quickly and to accept lies as truth because it's easier and they don't want to address harsh reality. I thought it was amazing how the author was able to get these big issues and bring them down to a kid's level where they are still able to understand what's going on, see the injustice, and know what's right and wrong. The writing in it was beautiful. The book had a very beautiful atmosphere to it. I could see this being a required reading in the future for children. It's a very important book. The next book I read took place during like the 60s, 70s period, and it follows 4 girls named Guinevere in the Guineveres. It was about 4 girls who were left at a convent for different reasons, and those reasons are actually told throughout the book. I'm not going to get too much into there because this book isn't really told chronologically. The revelations that you make about the girls and why they end up there add to the story in different ways, so I think it's just important to talk about the main plot, which honestly that's it. These 4 girls who end up in a convent, and they are trying to figure out themselves. The convent that they're in is incredibly strict. The nuns can be kind of cruel sometimes, and it's kind of hard to see these girls who already came from very, very tragic backstories be pushed into this unnurturing, uncaring world that does not let you self-express. It was a very hard read for me, but I absolutely loved the character studies. I loved seeing all of these hopes and aspirations, and whether or not the girls were able to achieve it. Reading up on Goodreads a little bit, a lot of people gave this one low reviews because it doesn't seem like a very plot-heavy book, which it's not. There is stuff that still goes on, but it's more about the triumph of the human spirit, and it's more about seeing these characters and seeing how they deal with the situations given to them. It's definitely a good book for anyone who has ever felt trapped and unable to express anything that is themselves and is stuck in a very limited environment. The next one on my list this month had so much potential. It had so much going for it, and then it just kind of veered off. It just did like a complete 180 and just So, I read Boy Snowbird, which I expected it anyways to be a kind of Snow White retelling, which it was in some ways. This book is about a girl named Boy, and she grows up in a very terrible home. Her father is abusive both emotionally and physically, so she decides to get out of it, right? So she leaves, right? She goes to a new town, gets a whole new fresh start, meets a guy who she kind of likes. He has a daughter whose name is Snow. She's like an absolute perfect girl, and she marries the guy. Not long after she marries him, she has a kid named Bird. It is then realized that her husband is African American. He's kind of, him and his family are kind of like really, really light African American, so they can pass as white. So they pretend to be white. I forgot to say this book takes place in the 50s, so unfortunately with the social structure of the time, this helps them advance a bit more, and they have kept this secret hidden. But the girl Bird, when she's born, she is very clearly African American. The family actually offers to send Bird away to another state to live with all of the other family members who were born looking black. And of course, Boy refuses to let this happen. Instead, she sends Snow away because for some reason, she just hates her now. There's really no lead into that. She just suddenly sees her as this horrible poser. She's like a tiny, tiny little girl, and everyone thinks she's perfect. She looks perfect. You know, it's very Snow White-esque, and she's very evil stepmother-esque at this point. So she sends Snow away, and then that section of the book ends. Next, it goes from Bird's perspective, where she is trying to reconnect with Snow, and they are writing notes across the country because they had never really met. Bird only knew Snow whenever she was super, super little, and she can barely remember her. So they decide to form a sisterly bond and get to know each other and get to know why Snow was sent away. So Bird is finally able to convince Boy that she should invite Snow back over, and then Thanksgiving hits. And then there is potential. There is so much potential. Up to this point, I was loving it. I was absolutely loving this book. It had a setup for so many good messages. Not only that, the language in here was beautiful, delectable. If this were food, I would eat it. I would eat it every single day because the author has such a beautiful way of words, beautiful way of describing things. There's some magical elements woven in there, as in Bird sometimes can't see herself in the mirror, and honestly, that's it. But still, I was hooked. I was so ready to see where this would go. And then Thanksgiving hits. You have a lot of setup for a lot of different beautiful arcs. You can have the arc of a mother discovering that her fears that her stepdaughter was terrible weren't true. You could have the arc of the family learning how wrong they were and how they should stick to their family no matter how they look, because they are all the same anyways. They're just posing. They're posers. And they don't address that. They somewhat address that. They itty-bitty bit address that, and that's just in the form of complaint from the family members. But that's it. There's no revelation. There's no saying that, hey, maybe we should be more of a family and stick together no matter how we look. But no, they stay pretty much separated. Boy and Snow kind of duke it out whenever it comes to like the preconceived notions between the two, but there is no sign of anything going from there. And then Snow and Bird don't even have a great connection whenever they finally meet. And then this weird ass plot twist just hits, and it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't matter, and it's something that doesn't address anything that the book was leading up to. So it just happens, and then the book ends. And it's like, okay, what? This doesn't make any sense. And it didn't. And it didn't add anything to any of the characters' arcs. It didn't add anything to the plot. It didn't add anything to anything. I'm just mad. I was just so mad because I was loving this so much. And I was like, yes, this could be a new favorite author. She writes so beautifully. But then that happened. And normally my issue isn't with the plot, because I don't care about plot. But this was just dumb. This was dumb. And I'm done. I can't keep insulting this book because there are such beautiful things to it. And then it ends like that. Anyways, I'm done. I'm probably going to cut out most of that because that was just a long-heated, disgusting, spite-filled rant. And I'm done. Let's talk about something nice. One second. Oh, I read a classic. And I absolutely loved it because I knew I was going to love it. And I read it because I knew I was going to love it because I needed it after this. I completely diverged from my TBR to cheer myself up. And that was with Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This is a true story about sisterhood, and I absolutely love it. And then Jane Austen also has beautiful language, and she follows through on her plot lines. Sorry, I'm still glaring at that one book. Let me just... I'm fine. So, Sense and Sensibility is about two sisters who are completely screwed over by their family because their father dies, their stepbrother, and of course inherits everything because he's the man, and he leaves them with absolutely almost nothing. And they kind of have to move to a smaller house, leave their childhood home. They have to leave their childhood home, move to a smaller house, and then just deal, and then hope to catch rich husbands. Of course, there is a lot of deception, heartbreak, a lot of zany misunderstandings, and all that kind of stuff that you can see in Jane Austen's work. But the thing that shines through the most in this is definitely the characters. Eleanor is my heart and soul. I love her so much. She is the sensible one of the book, and she has to hide a lot of her emotions because her sister Marianne is incredibly emotional. She's royally screwed over by this one jerk guy, and she has a mental breakdown. And poor Eleanor at the same time is also very heartbroken over something else, and she has to deal with it silently because they both have very different ways of dealing. Marianne just completely shuts down. Her entire family has to worry about her the entire time, gets very sick, gets very emotional. And then Eleanor is a caregiver. She wants to take care of other people, so she has to deal with poor Marianne and her heartbreak while silently dealing with her own, which I completely relate to. And I love to see how the two of them grow from their situations and are able to still find happiness. Marianne obviously needing a little more sense, and then Eleanor obviously needing a bit more sensibility, showing that there should be a happy medium to the two. I absolutely love this book. I love Jane Austen. So, diverging again from my TBR is my last, but definitely not least book of the month. Just finished it the other day, and I'm still kind of shook. It was a nonfiction that I picked up on impulse just for the title, and that was Pure, which is Inside the Evangelical Movement That Shamed a Generation of Young Women and How I Broke Free by Linda K. Klein. This is a very important book. This book is about this girl, Linda, and she is going around and getting stories from all sorts of girls who grew up very strictly religious. It'll talk about these girls that are shamed for their bodies, for their thoughts, for just absolutely anything. It goes a lot into rape culture as well. So that is a major trigger warning, and it goes into how the victim blaming is still very, very strong in the church, and how girls are told to just be pure. They have purity balls, purity rings, all sorts of purity cultures that kind of damages them, because a lot of girls even talked about how they still got married and they had fused the thought of sex with shame for so long there was no going back from it, and they had very, very unhappy home lives afterwards because they just couldn't separate the two. All of the stories are wonderful and there's a lot of triumph in them, but there's still a lot of pain because some of that mental shaming is still always there, and it just adds guilt to their everyday life. Even though they do get out of the poisonous natures of the church, that shame is still there because it was instilled in them since they were children. And it makes you realize how much damage is being done in the name of God, which I think is terrible. I myself have gotten out of my own church because of sort of similar reasons. I still definitely consider myself a believer. It was actually really good to see So Did She in the book. She just did not go to churches anymore because they can be such poisonous atmospheres and there's very little progression in it. It goes into, like I said, rape culture, it goes into marriage, it goes into just power dynamics in women and how they're encouraged to be meek and quiet, and it talks about breaking through the glass ceiling, or the book says breaking through the stained glass ceiling. It offers a lot of support just in the way of knowing that you're not alone, because a lot of people have experienced the exact same thing. So if you are curious about this movement, or if you have been in similar situations yourself and you are just now realizing the damage it may have done to you, this is a very good book for it because it shows you're not alone. It offers some solutions to it, although I feel like the person in the book is still overcoming stuff, so there's not absolute answers in there. It's kind of about finding your own way throughout these situations. It's very, very good, and it was incredibly helpful for me personally. I definitely recommend it to anyone facing similar problems. It just shows a very strong form of solidarity and sisterhood. Definitely recommend. Those were all of my books for this month. I'm really excited about October. Ready to get into some lighter stuff, some spookier stuff, hopefully stuff that won't cheese me off as much as that one did. It's over there now. As much as that one did. But yeah, no, I'm good. I just hope this next month's good. I'm going to be posting my TBR next, so I'm looking forward to seeing you in that. Let's get ready for Halloween, people. Awkward outro.